According to Gallup's latest State of the Global Workplace report, 2/3 of the workforce is passively disengaged, while 13% is actively disengaged. They're taking actions that directly harm the organisation and its goals. And just 1 in 5 reported that they were engaged and thriving at work. Gallup's unveiled that the global cost of disengaged employees has skyrocketed to an eye-watering $8.9 trillion annually. Trillion! So if workplace disengagement and employee disengagement is at an all-time high, what do we need to do about it? I'm joined by Claire Seeber and we unpack it all. Less hustle, more happy, and how do we take control of our careers? Let's get started. Welcome to Reimagining HR with Trina Sunday, the rule-breaking podcast where we challenge our thinking and our current people practices. This podcast is for time-poor HR teams and business leaders who are feeling the burn, lacking laughs, and not feeling the love. I'm Trina, your host, and I'm here to cut through the BS, explore different ways of thinking, and create high-impact HR functions. Because happier, healthier organisations are better for our people and our bottom line. So if you are keen to flip traditional HR on its head, hit the follow or subscribe button so you're the first to know when new episodes drop. I'm here to help and also to shake things up. So let's get started. Welcome. I'm joined by Claire Seeber today. She's a career and leadership coach, trainer, speaker, and author of the book, Less Hustle, More Happy, which I'm very excited to see hitting our shelves this month. She's an expert in career development and leadership and blends her experience in business, HR, and comms to make magic happen and allow people to show up as their best selves and have an impact on themselves, their teams, their organisations, and feel really proud about who they are and what they do. I've invited Claire to have a chat today around disengaged and disconnected employees. So ready to get stuck in? Welcome, Claire.
Thanks for having me. It is a weird feeling sitting listening to somebody say your bio as you just sit here politely feeling uncomfortable. But thank you. I'm excited. I always love a good chat with you.
Love a good chat. For people that might not know you, set the scene for us a little bit. And we'll talk obviously around what led us to want to have this conversation that we're having today around disengaged and disconnected employees. But talk us through a little bit your background and what's led you to where you are and what's lighting you up in the work that you're doing at the moment.
Yeah. So I always like to start with the human because what I do is not who I am. So in terms of Claire as the human being, I love to laugh. I do serious work, but I don't take myself too seriously. I'm a big believer in that the world needs more heart, more humor, more honest conversation, human to human. So I try to bring that into everything that I do. I love to travel, love a good belly laugh, love a good glass of wine, cheese enthusiast, all of those sorts of things. And really started out I've always had an appetite to work. I was like the 6-year-old selling the lemonade, hustling the kids at school for, extra lunch money. And then I'd take that money and turn it into a small business on the side and then resell things to them, all that kind of stuff. I've always had an appetite to work out how businesses can thrive through and with people. And I look back at that now and I see how clearly that was for me from a really young age. But basically it led me to 15 years in HR roles, in communications roles, in various industries. So I'm a Perth gal, born and raised, worked here in HR and comms roles in oil and gas, in mining, in telecommunications. And then I moved over east to Melbourne for about 6 years and took on a head of HR role over there for a big retail and e-commerce business. That for me, from a career perspective, was an absolute game changer and was without question the catalyst for me to start my own business and start doing the things that I do now. Never ever went to work in that role anyway and hated what I did. So me starting my own business wasn't because of that, but I had that moment where you start asking yourself, what does it look like when I'm having my best days? And what does it look like when I'm having those days where I'm like, I could do without that. And so for me, I realized that the things that I was really good at and that also warmed my heart was anything to do in the space of how do we engage humans and teams and people to be their best selves at work, do their best work so that they feel good about their contribution and so that teams can thrive. And so that sort of then led into me doing more coaching, more workshops, more kind of culture work, and then started the usual side hustle. Did some coaching on the side, actually got my very first client back in 2019 in Greece. So I took leave from my corporate role to go and fly to Greece and run a week-long program for an exec team over there. And I was like, holy shit, who am I to be doing this? Anyway, it was just a crazy experience. Got back, continued on with them for 3 months, resigned from my job. And then, they say the rest is history. It's not been without its challenges, but that was the catalyst for me to land where I am now, which is working with individuals to help them be the best talent that everybody wants on their teams, but also helping organizations keep and grow and nurture their best talent as well so that we can achieve organizational outcomes without selling our souls, Trina, because that sucks in work.
It really does. And I think I love everything about that in terms of, where we are in terms of having thriving organizations and people feeling like that. And I'm interested to know if you have people react to the word thrive as strongly as I do, as if it's some idealistic utopia that people just think consultants say and it's not reachable. I find that interesting that it feels so unattainable. And I think that's part of what we're leaning into a conversation today around, why so many people are feeling disengaged and disconnected. Like, why are they so far from kind of being reignited in the work that they do? And I know that, we were talking about Gallup's kind of latest State of the Global Workplace report, and, the levels of disengagement are off the chart. Like 2/3 of our workforce are passively disengaged. And then you've got 13% that are actively disengaged. So those people are dangerous, right? They are taking direct action to harm your organization. 13% feels really high.
Yeah.
And it's costing us an eye-watering 8.9 million, I think it is, trillion, annually, like trillion. We don't talk in the trillions. So,
yeah,
what are you seeing in organizations around disengagement and that disconnect? Like, what are you seeing out there?
I'm certainly not seeing any one thing. I'm seeing a variety of different things, but I think we are, and I was actually having a conversation with somebody about this just yesterday, who is a manager of quite a large team. And we were just talking about the fact that life for a lot of people feels hard at the moment. And not only feels hard, for a lot of people, life is hard, right? Like the cost of living this year, I don't know about you, but it's just felt like this year's sickness has been around a lot more and it's wearing people down. And so I think there's that element. So there's the pressures from life. And then I think that coupled with pressures in work have led a lot of our resilience levels to go to such a low level that things probably that wouldn't have bothered us previously now are. And our coping strategies or the tools and the resources that we maybe have previously lent on are either not there or we are not as able to tap into them because we're in a headspace where we're not able to see the wood from the trees. And so I think that's one thing I'm seeing. And the leader I was talking to yesterday was basically talking about the fact that she was like, I don't want to be a manager anymore. Like the reasons that I wanted to be a leader or manage teams and what I thought it was going to be about are in reality not actually what it is. And she was talking about how she's like, I'm just trying to keep my head above water and survive. And yet I feel an indescribable level of baggage for that, having that same level of responsibility for other people as well. So I think that that's one enormous element is just, I think resilience levels in general are a little down, coupled with leaders who are also humans, right? Let's not forget, like leaders are human beings too.
Are they?
What?
You heard it here first, people. You heard it here first.
Public service announcement. Look, they are humans too. So they're dealing with their own crap in life and then trying to also support others in it as well. Not always equipped with the how-tos or the guidance. Didn't go to the school of leadership. They just got thrust into these roles one day and told all the best with that. So that's one thing I'm seeing. I'm also seeing a really a big disconnect in why we go to work beyond just the fact that I've got to pay my mortgage and my bills. And I think for many people, we've lost sight of what it actually is that I want to get out of my work. And the other part is we've gotten so busy, both in truth, but also we've got so busy being busy that I believe we've often stopped asking the questions about why we are so busy. And are we busy with impactful work, or are we busy and beaten down with work that we've got swept up in, but it isn't actually leading to outcomes for ourselves, for our teams, or for our organizations? And over time, that is what leads employees to disengage. I don't feel like I'm contributing to a purpose, or I don't even know what the purpose is. I'm not using my strengths, my talents, my own skill sets that light me up to get these outcomes. And I've lost sight of what career success is for me as the individual as well. So I don't even have that to lean in on anymore when I have those shitty days.
Yeah.
That would be my take on things.
There's a lot in that. Let's unpack some of it. But I might start with where you ended there around career success, because I've had some interesting conversations recently about that. And even on my last podcast episode, a couple of weeks ago, it's around career clarity and specifically, walking through kind of for HR professionals, what is it that they're going to do that's going to light them up, and having really interesting conversations. And success does look like different things to different people. And I feel like what used to be a guilty statement of I want flexibility or I want this, that, and the other are now really grounded in terms of kind of, if we're looking holistically at our lives and life being too short and, not wanting to spend our entire existence at work at the expense of our family or people we love, we need it to look different. And I know you and I have had a previous conversation around entitlement in workplaces. So that's being received differently depending on where you're coming at those conversations from. But when you talk about why we come to work, do you feel like it has shifted? Like, is it that the organizations we're working in just aren't showing up with the goods anymore? Or is it that we've changed, do you think? What are your thoughts?
I think it's both. I think I've changed, you've changed, organizations have changed. I think the world has changed. And yet we're trying to show up with the same tools as what we had before.
Yeah.
And I think that, the first piece of guidance that I always give people when they come to me, and probably you as well, around I'm feeling stuck, I'm feeling unfulfilled, but I can't put my finger on why, is to get them to go back to baseline of exactly what I said to you before, like beyond just paying my bills, what else do I want to get out of this? And yes, we should be paid our worth. And like, to me, those things now are almost hygiene factors.
Yeah.
So I kind of think like beyond those things, what is it that is important to you? And not what you think should be important, but what actually is important. And when you're having those days where you get home and you feel good, right? Like, what do you feel good about? And when you have those days where you don't feel good, what is it that didn't feel good? And it'll be different things for different people. Like I was speaking to somebody the other day, two people the other day, two entirely different conversations. And one person, when I said, what feels good in your working day? I don't want to know about the task. I want to know about the kinds of things you engage in. And they're like, my best days. And when I'm collaborating with other people to solve a problem and we get that outcome, they're like, that feels so good for me. Then next conversation I have a couple of hours later with somebody completely different, ask a similar question. And their answer was, when I'm autonomous, like I really like when I've got autonomy to make decisions for myself. And so that's something we've lost sight of as individuals, is because it'll change over the course of our careers and our lives too, right? Like,
absolutely,
what you cared about 10, 15 years ago and what you care about now are probably slightly different things. But I think we've lost a little bit of the ability to check in with ourselves, and we live sometimes from the outside in instead of the inside out. And there'll probably be people that hear me say that, similar to the word thrive or the word potential, or let's not say unlock potential. That'll really ignite some eye rolls. But when I say things like living from the inside out versus the outside in, I think we've lost an ability to give ourselves permission to do that. And I think that leads to resentment. I think it leads to frustration. I think it leads to feeling unseen, unheard, unvalued. And there are other factors for those things too, but it does start with us seeing ourselves first.
And I think, when you talked about organisations are still showing up in the same way, it's like we've had the same formula, right? And same with the transformational work I do with HR teams. It's like, that talent management model from Burson, circa, 1992 or something. The world has changed, right? And there is a pace that we need to be able to work at and adapt, but also an individualized approach to it. So I think the formula is kind of a bit off, right?
Yeah.
I also think, though, that we've kind of given over our career happiness to the organisation and we've stopped taking control of it ourselves. And I think no organisation is going to know us as well as we know ourselves. And yet the busyness that you talk about and the hustle, we kind of are not going into that reflective space and we're not really kind of taking the time to look at what the things are that are going to light us up.
Yeah.
So if the formula is broken and if organisations were going to focus their energy and their effort or their conversations in a different space, I guess, to help people be more fulfilled in their careers, like what do you think they should do?
I mean, I think there's many things that organisations can do. And I think I probably want to say as well, like obviously today's conversation, we're talking largely around like disengagement and this idea around what can the individual do as well as the organisation. There's a huge element in this conversation, which we're probably not tapping into as much today, around the role that leaders do play in this as well. So I guess I just want to flag that. That's like a whole podcast on its own. But I think in terms of things that organisations can go back and check in on around, are we doing these things? The first thing for me is around, do people really understand what they are a part of? We've been talking here a little bit around like individual purpose and how can organizations help people tap into that a little bit more. And there are ways that they can do that around literally just asking people the question, taking an interest and genuine curiosity in the human that works with you. But there's individual purpose and connection to that. Then there's also organizational purpose. And how do we give employees, to engage them more effectively, a deeper understanding of what their hard work is actually contributing to? And it sounds like, when we say it like this, it sounds like an obvious thing, to the point where I think a lot of the time people go, yeah, of course we do. But my question is, if you actually went, and I know this because I ask it often in workshops that I run, around, talk to me about how your role contributes to the purpose of the organization. And more often than not, people will look at me blankly and be like, I don't know how to answer that, Claire. Right? And it's not their fault. Yes, they could do some research and be asking bigger questions themselves. But I kind of go, well, imagine for organizations what could be achieved if people were more connected to how their effort, their expertise contributes to the purpose and the mission and the outcomes of an organization. So that would be the first thing that I would say, is for people listening to really ask the question of, like, if I went to random people inside my organization and I said, how does your role and the 40 hours a week that you give us contribute to our purpose? Could they actually answer that question? And what I don't mean here is that they just translate their job description and read out the dot points that are on their job description. I mean, actually, how do they contribute to something bigger? So that, for me, is a huge thing around driving better engagement. The second thing I think is also kind of piggybacks off the first one, is how do we drive more impactful conversations around strengths, skills, and talents? Because for a lot of people, we're operating in an environment where we're so busy that yet we're operating on autopilot in that busyness. And we're not actually thinking about, of all the things I know, of all the things I've done, all the skills that I have, which one will be the most impactful one for me to use to get an outcome here? A, do I even know what they are? B, can I own them confidently? C, do I know how to leverage them to get outcomes for my team or for my department or my organization? Right? And then D, do I know the reverse point of impact on that when, if I lean into it too much, actually is going to have a reverse impact and just piss everybody off around me. And so
take your passion and shove it. Not today, Jane.
like, I think there's a real missed opportunity in the way teams have these conversations to ignite more engagement. And that can be as simple as teams having conversations around, like, what skill set do you think you actually used to get that outcome this week? Like, this was an amazing result. What strengths did you use to do it? And again, getting people to be just more cognizant of the really amazing parts of them that they are using to get outcomes. And that in itself fuels enthusiasm. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, and then I'll stop talking. The third thing that I think is an opportunity again is, and I'm keen for you to build on this too, like, language fuels culture. And you only have to walk the floors of most organizations and just open your ears for 30 seconds. And the conversations will generally be like, hey, how you going? Oh my God, I'm so busy. Oh my God, me too. I just need more time. I've been working every night this week. And again, I'm not questioning that there are huge parts of that that are probably very true. But if we take this lens of that language builds culture, and we are in an organization that is using busy as a badge of honor, busy as a metric of performance, as opposed to impact, we've got a problem. And I think the opportunity in there for HR teams, for leaders, for boards, everything is to switch the language and obviously get deeper than just saying, don't use that word anymore, but switch this idea of what am I busy with to what impact did I have this week? What impact did we have this week? If we said yes to this week, what did we say no to? And was that the right decision for us? And is it getting us closer to the outcomes that we need? And so I think being able to start embedding practices, rituals consistently like that can go a really long way to shifting the needle a little bit more around re-engaging people, re-inspiring people to still achieve results, but without them feeling like I'm just selling my damn soul doing it.
Yeah. And I think, it's like when, and I'm pretty sure I heard you talk about this, so I won't take credit for it, but it's like, I've heard people say, I don't know how to say no. It's like, no, you say no all the time. You say no when you say yes to that other thing at the expense of the thing that you were going to do. You say no to the gym when you decide to go and have the wine, Trina. You say there's always a no, but there's not a consciousness around it. So we say yes to things quite readily without having that conscious and deliberate kind of thought process, right? I loved the reframing you were talking about for the strengths reflection. I always talk with my coaching clients around what their superpowers are and, how they talk about it. How do they know what they are? How do they know when to use them? It's not always appropriate to use your superpower in any given situation. But I love the reframe of, often we encourage people to do lessons learned and to debrief and say, okay, what went really well with that? But I don't think I've ever been in a conversation where I've heard someone in the room be saying, okay, so what skills and expertise and strengths did we bring to the table to solve this problem, to build this thing, to help these customers? What skills did we use? Whose skills did we use? How did we leverage them? It's like, oh, yes, we used your expertise over there. Didn't even think about you for the project because it wasn't your role. And we've pigeonholed a lot of that. And I think when we have a greater fluidity around how we harness the collective strengths of the people that we have in our organizations, then there is a greater connection because we're built to be connected humans, right? And so I think it can be really easy to disengage with the task. It's harder to disengage with the people, especially if we care about them. But we often find it hard to disengage with the people we don't care about because we're too busy hating on them. But, I think it's trying to just figure out, I think that reflection, that reframing to add the strengths and the expertise reflection in there's an actual really powerful one.
Absolutely. This then becomes about discipline, right? It's not capacity to do that or even capability to do that. It's the discipline to decide that I'm going to embed a new way of doing things, a new ritual into the conversations that we have as a team or we have as a department, instead of spending the time just talking to the next task or spending the time just talking to, what was shit about it. How can we flip the narrative and stick to doing that as well?
Yeah. And this is the evolution of what, old school were team charter conversations, right? It's like more that sitting there and think as a team, what are the habits? What are the daily practice, the rituals going to be that are going to help us level up, support each other, ensure we have a safe space, and to fail fast, learn faster. But how do we kind of make sure we can hold that space to be as agile as possible, to be as innovative, collaborative, all that good stuff in terms of us getting the result? So what is it at the individual level? If individuals are kind of looking at, you mentioned them using their expertise, you're talking about them having a bit more enthusiasm around how do they harness those things together to take control of their career? Because I feel like we've given that power over to others and we need to take it back. I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I wrote a whole book about that. So shameless plug, Less Hustle, More Happy, grab your coffee. It talks about this in its entirety. To your point, how can we as individuals be the driver of our own careers, but then equally as much, how can we be the person on the team that like everybody wants to be working with too?
And the leaders that help build that in others, right? We talked and acknowledged the fact that the leader gap in the conversation where it could be a whole episode, but how can leaders step into that space of supporting those careers as well?
Absolutely. And so to me, there's two parts. The first I've sort of already touched on, and in the book I talk about it too, this 3E formula to a happy career.
Talk me through it.
Which for me is around how do we combine our effort, and when I say effort, I mean targeted efforts, plus our expertise, so our skills, our strengths, our talents, plus our enthusiasm equals a happy career. And why I think that this is so important is because when we do get so busy being busy, we lose sight of, again, what am I busy with? And that's why I say targeted effort is the key part of that, because we can put in a lot of effort and a lot of inputs, a lot of time, stress, pressure, and then feel really frustrated, as many employees do, when I don't feel like my efforts are actually translating to outcomes. And that's where people disengage. And that's where often we feel like we're losing hope, because we're like, well, all the inputs are there, but it's not translating to outputs or outcomes. So targeted effort in terms of being really clear for you as the individual, like what is success for you, both in terms of your career and your role. Like what is success for you and beyond just paying your bills, but also the value that you add to the organization. What does success look like for that? Who do I need to know and who needs to know me in this organization in order for me to get outcomes more easily and with more joy attached to them as well? Then go out and nurture those relationships. Go out and cultivate those relationships instead of just having on your to-do list, build network, right? Like actually take a targeted approach to how we do that inside our organizations.
Spray and pray.
Yes, spray and pray. And then add to that again, and I won't go into it in too much detail, but this knowing your skills, knowing your strengths, knowing your talents, knowing your passions, and then being able to leverage them more intentionally, more deliberately at work. Those two things on their own take us out of this space of what it means to be a hoper, which is that person who is, I'm rocking up. Like, I don't hate it. I'm not actively setting it on fire, but like there's other places I'd rather be. That person who's sitting back, hoping, waiting that my manager might come to me with a development plan one day.
That was 20-year-old Trina the dreamer.
As opposed to like, what can Trina do for herself to take her from hoper to happy, right? So that's kind of one of them. And then the other part of how this formula contributes to a happy career is it also takes us from the hustler. And the hustler are those people in organizations who are working so hard, right? They're putting in the effort. No one's questioning the effort, but their enthusiasm is so low that not only is it probably having an impact on their teams and the people that work with them, but it is absolutely having an impact on themselves because they feel like they're banging their heads against a wall. We're pushing really hard on the effort front with the inputs to the point where I'm now starting to be frustrated. I'm burnt out. I don't want to be here. And that is probably impacting the relationships that I've got with myself, with the people that I work with, and probably the people in my life too. My argument is that a dissatisfied employee is unlikely to be a satisfied human.
Yes.
It bleeds. And as much as we can say, oh, we separate work from life, like, I'm sorry, we don't. We don't. They bleed into each other. And I will die on that hill, Trina. I will die on that.
I'll be there right next to you.
They bleed into each other. So a dissatisfied employee is a dissatisfied human, and it will be impacting other areas of their lives. And so I think if we can kind of zoom out, look at some of the strategies that I talk a lot about in the book around like self-awareness, vision, mindset, cultivating the right relationships with the right people at the right time, looking at what it actually means to have performance currency in an organization, which isn't just about working harder and harder and harder and hoping somebody notices, but it's actually, again, going back to that targeted effort and how can I be an impact player? And then this piece around future-proofing ourselves. And I talk about this idea of being a meerkat, my most favorite animal apart from my dog. Then the meerkat idea is, you know how meerkats, like, they're just so fun to watch at the zoo, and they're looking up. They're looking up with enthusiasm and they're looking around them. They're my favorite animals because they're actually looking up and they look happy. They're looking around them with excitement instead of dread and fear and anxiety and stress about what's coming my way, because I've been able to set myself up again from the inside out instead of, oh gosh, all of this change is going to keep coming. I can't deal with it. I can't handle it. And then the way that I handle it then end up being things that I don't feel proud of. And then the shame spiral continues about how I'm not handling things well. And now I'm more disengaged. I'm more disgruntled. I'm more resentful.
Yep.
So, it starts with self. In fact, I have someone ask me regularly in workshops around when I talk about self-awareness, and they're like, Claire, like, when is the whole self-awareness thing done? Like, when will I tick that box?
When can I stop journaling? When are you going to tell me that I can stop journaling? It's not for me.
I'm not a journaler either, to be honest. I go through waves with it. But what I've found very helpful is mind mapping and brain dumping, which I think is just a similar thing. But I found words that work for me that don't incite the I should do this, but I don't want to do this vibes. So I think, the self-awareness thing underpins everything. Like, we can teach, I imagine you would agree with this, we can teach all of the skills and all the frameworks in the world around how to navigate conflict and how to give feedback and all these things that are really, really important to having careers that are fulfilling. But if we don't actually know who we are at our core, what lights us up, what freaks us out, what triggers us, what pisses us off, what motivates us, then those skills and those tools aren't going to be put into practice, or they're not going to be put into practice effectively because I haven't understood myself first. So the book does talk a lot about how can we show up for ourselves first and foremost to feel better about what I'm doing with my 25,550 days on earth. But then secondly, how can that translate to being more impactful on the people that I work with and the outcomes that I get?
And I think the devil's advocate in me, while you're up on the hill, where we talk about life bleeding, what's happening at home comes to work and what happens at work comes home, right? But when we look at the whole person, the human to human, right? What are your thoughts around the fact that we do have a lot of us that as soon as I hear the word resilience or coping mechanisms, there's a bit of like eye rolling and, there are people we started some of this chat, right, where you were saying that people are fatigued. They're not feeling that they have the energy, the power, the inclination or the appetite to fight anymore even, not your words, mine. But I think, so the challenge is when we have this mixing pot of people, we do have people coming to work, let's be honest, many or some of them at least, who are inherently unhappy people and are going to be unhappy at work and probably have no interest in what we're talking about here, right? So I guess they're not our audience. Thanks for coming. What are your thoughts around like the reality check of how hard this is and where it stops and starts? And because I know for HR teams, for example, HR teams are typically then the ones getting that's not real. This person's trying to connect the meaning for their job to the purpose.
Yes.
They're 16 degrees of separation from that goal. And it's like, well, your job as leaders is to translate how they shift the needle in what regard. But some people are finding it a bit of a stretch, and HR teams, I think, are in the middle trying to be the bridge around the aspiration for us having and, enabling happy careers with the reality of some dysfunctional and toxic kind of environments that are making it a bit hard for that to be conducive for thriving.
I agree with you around the eye rolls that often come now when the words resilience are used, or coping strategies, all those kinds of things. It's almost like it's like I get it, but just I don't even have the capacity to deal with that. And I think it's important to note that when we talk about purpose and stuff like that, and I talk about this in the book too, it isn't about saying that your purpose and your why has to be work. My argument is actually just get clear on what's important to you in your life, because when we're clear on those things and we know what is important, we can then make better decisions. So for the person, as an example that you gave, who, might be going to work and they're just an unhappy person, maybe stuff has happened, or maybe they are just generally not a satisfied person. My argument, and I've worked with these people before in previous HR roles too, my argument still for that person is that there's something in there with them where they don't feel heard, seen, valued, or fulfilled. Maybe a combination of a number of those things. And so we are still humans at the end of the day. So how can I connect with the human in there and work out with them? This is not saying we need people to share all of the intimate details of their lives, but how can I connect with the human in there to understand for them, like, what is it that you enjoy? And as the leader, it's about being curious about your team. Okay, what you enjoy is actually that you really love playing video games at nighttime, and you just want to come in, do your job, and you want to go home and do that because you really enjoy that. Maybe you're so good at video games that you get paid and that's your side hustle, is to play video games. So this for you is a means for you to be able to do that. Great. We've still tapped into then what motivates you as a human. So, hey, what would it mean to you then if we were able to work together a little bit more and help you be even more impactful in the way you do the job when you're here, so that you can get home quicker and do the other shit that you want to do?
Yeah.
And I know it's more complicated than that. And, we're doing a 30-minute podcast trying to solve the world's issues. But I think even people that go into work and they're like, I just want to do my job. Awesome. Like, seriously, awesome. Because not everybody's needs to have their purpose be work. But my argument is, and what the book's saying is, work out though what it is that is important to you. And then how do you bring more of that in consciously into the work that you do? Even if that is, if I do my job really well here, I can go home quicker, take some stress off my back because I don't have to think about work, and enjoy playing my video games.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've gone down the video game path. I don't personally play them.
I'm not here to judge you, but I also thought you might be helping that person bring gamification solutions to the workplace, but that's okay. We might see if those superpowers in gaming can be used on the job and be more impactful by gaming as part of their role.
There you go.
But I do think there's elements around, we overcomplicate, and to your point that you made earlier, the language around it, right? And I think from a HR perspective as well, because it's hard for us to talk at this very human level one-on-one with everybody. And it's why we need leaders in the middle who care and have empathy and can have coaching conversations. And I don't mean that in a wanky way. I mean it in a really meaningful, how can I help you grow?
Yeah.
How can I help you have insight into who you are? How can I help you level up? Like, find your own words, right? Because when I think about my own career in that space, like, it is very liberating when you realize you don't care about your job. Now, let me expand on that. Yeah. I don't mean my business. Clearly, I'm passionate about this, and this is, my enthusiasm is off the charts, but I feel like I've applied your 3E formula, right? Like, in terms of, you talked about the targeted effort, and for me, it's different language, but the deliberate intention, like deliberate and conscious around, what it is that I'm doing and why, and then how I use my superpowers to do that in areas that light me up. And, and I was talking about that in the Career Clarity podcast, but it's very liberating when you realize, for example, so I don't want to be that high up on the career ladder.
Yes.
And for me, obviously, moving to Cambodia and having a whole different perspective on money and what wealth looks like. So you talked about what career success looked like. I've done a lot of work around what wealth looks like, and being wealthy not necessarily being about the money. It's being time with family, healthy, having freedom. And so the work and the money is a means to the freedom.
Yep.
And the freedom to choose is what will fuel my happiness, to then be able to choose to do the work. And so to your point earlier where you were talking about the manager who'd shared it's just not worth the money, like I'm in this space where I'm now not as impactful as I thought I would be. And I think it's quite liberating if you can have someone say, do you know what, I don't want to be a manager.
Yeah.
But I think we've got an opportunity, though, to address some of the causes for why being a manager is so unpleasant. It doesn't have to be that way. And we can be doing a lot more to set that up for success. But I think there's a lot in what you're sharing, I think, around, there's no kind of lost causes in it. I can guarantee there'll be people rolling their eyes and thinking that we are sitting here as unicorns or something around what, but we've seen it, right? We've both seen it. And that's where we have synergy.
I've also been in the funk where I'm like, this sucks, but you get to choose.
Yeah.
And there'll be people that are like, well, I don't get to choose. I've got bills to pay. And I've also got bills to pay. Like, there is a lot of privilege that comes with choice. Like, I fully acknowledge that. But we can choose. Like, if there is somebody that's like genuinely miserable in what they're doing, we still do get to choose. Do I stay and continue to be miserable? Or do I just start the process of thinking about what might it look like if I wasn't miserable? And what would actually need to be different? And get really specific about what would actually need to be different for me if I was to start to feel more engaged or more satisfied. Like, if we just start, permission to start, I think is for a lot of people what we need to do. Just permission to start.
Mission granted. I think there are the steps that people take, as you say, but I think that awareness of knowing, I think some people struggle and don't realize for a long time that they are stuck. Yeah. And I feel like that's why your relationships that you have around you are really important in terms of, hey, dude, really stuck over here. I've heard the same story from you about 6 times, and it plays out differently in your social circles versus with your spouse versus, what's happening at the football field or wherever it is that you socialize with people or interact with humans. But sometimes we don't see it. When you say, see the wood for the trees, sometimes you can be so far in it that you don't see it. And I think part of what I would encourage for that is if we cared about people at all, and if we're not sociopaths, then I think there's an opportunity in there around, again, not being intrusive and not being all up in people's grill around their life and their woes or, intruding into kind of privacy. But if we see people in our team that are clearly unhappy, I think, there's some really simple kind of even just talking to people around, I was listening to this really interesting thing around happy careers, and it was quite interesting talking about just planting seeds for people around, I did some stuff then. I was just thinking about what is it makes me happy, because coming here is not making me happy, and this is what it looks like for me. And I think just sharing that, right, out of this kind of common drive to help lift people up. And I know a lot of people that are built like that. And so I think even if we did that to help encourage giving people some line of sight would be a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you as we close out this chat, Claire. I'm having lots of ideas and we might have to have a follow-up.
Love that for us.
What does reimagining HR look like to you?
Reimagining HR to me is around, and I'm drawing on my own earlier experiences being in HR teams years ago. It's about moving away from the tell or sell experience to, we are also business owners. When I say we are business owners, I mean HR professionals inside organizations. You are part of the business too. We need to think like business owners. And so whether that is for the individual, it's about elevating your own business acumen or your commercial knowledge and your understanding of how business actually runs, whether it's just understanding more about the different departments that make your business successful. Reimagining HR is seeing yourself as a HR professional, but as a business professional who is there to help the organization, or not even help, who plays a part in the organization achieving its outcomes. But in order to do that, we've got to get out of previous traumatic memories that I have of being just in our silos of the HR space and more into understanding the nuts and the bolts and the metrics of an organization, and then how do people play a part in bringing that to life. That for me, and I know there's a lot of amazing HR teams that are like well and truly on that journey and have done that flip, but I still see plenty of opportunity for it to continue as well. That would be what it is for me.
I think so too. And in the hustle and bustle of it and their own busyness, I think they can break down those silos, right? Less hustle, more happy. I'm on board, Claire. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in and leaning in to this week's episode as we look to reimagine how we show up for our people, organisations and community. Reach out to us via our website at reimaginehr.com.au with your HR horror stories or suggestions of people you'd love to hear from or topics you want to explore. It's all about people, purpose and impact, and we are here for all of it. Until next time, take care, team.